All right, testing the microphone. Check 1, 2. Is this thing on? That sounds good. There I am. Hello and welcome to another Tuesday Ableton Office Hours live stream. My name is Zaak Kerstetter. I'm an Ableton Certified Trainer. And this is something we like to do here on the channel on Tuesdays is hang out and talk about making music with Ableton Live or any software, I guess, if you want, but mostly focused on Ableton Live. So generally the way this happens, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, or if you happen to be watching the video that gets uploaded to the channel, Tuesdays, I kind of hang out and I screw around making some music, messing around, playing around and stuff. And then people can pop in and ask me questions, and they can be whatever you want to talk to me about. As long as it's somewhat tangentially related to music or music production, you're welcome to do whatever you feel like. So that's kind of the idea today. And sometimes I'll come in here and I'll have like a certain topic or something kind of planned out. But today I do not. So I think, but just based purely off of instinct, what I'm feeling today is I want to do a little bit of like bass sound design, but not my normal kind of grimy, filthy bass sound design, but more of like a plucky, housey kind of bass. I've been listening to more house music recently, DJ more house music recently, and it's gotten me inspired to want to make some more kind of like housey sounds. So I'm going to go through and experiment, show you guys some techniques that I already know that I like to use, as well as try a few new things and kind of see where I can get to with this kind of sound design. But if at any point during the stream, if you'd like to chime in, ask questions, you are more than welcome to do so, whether it's related to what I'm doing or otherwise. So let's go ahead and dive into doing some bass sound design. Now, to me, there's really my three main options when it comes to doing any kind of bass sound design are going to be operator, wavetable, and Siren. So for the purposes of this video, I think I'm going to use operator. I really love operator. It's just a fantastic all-around synthesizer. And for the kind of plucky sound that I want to go for, I think this is going to get me some really good results very, very easily. But we're going to play around with it a bit and really kind of experiment and kind of see how this works. So to start off, make sure I'm playing something in a nice and low octave. Now, the cool thing about operator, if you don't know already, is that it's an FM synthesizer, which means that you can basically take the frequency of one oscillator and basically you can take one oscillator multiplied by another one, which gets you entirely new, interesting waveforms. And this can be done to play with your harmonics. I covered this in a video a little while back, but basically if we have, let's kind of reset everything here. We have one sine wave, just sounds like that. But if we take the other sine wave on oscillator B and start turning it up, or operator B, we get all kinds of new harmonics and waveforms, which can be really cool. So that's kind of part number one. Watch the video that I made about sound design a little while back, and that'll make it hopefully that'll make more sense. But the other thing that is really cool to explore is this coarse frequency control. This is going to pitch up the frequency of this oscillator based on the harmonic. And the way this works is basically if this waveform, let's actually just do one at a time. If this waveform, if I'm playing this note, if that's say, 100 hertz, the next one will be 200 hertz, then 300, then 400, then 500, 600, etc. So you're just taking the same number you're starting with in hertz and you're multiplying, and it gets very, very high pitched very fast, which gets really annoying. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this one alone. We're going to keep this one just as a sine wave right now, but we might play with that later. And on this next one, there's also a sine wave. We're going to turn this up. We're going to see it or hear it playing with our harmonics. And let's add a spectrum analyzer on here as well, so you can see all the new harmonics that are being added in, depending on the volume of this oscillator. And then if I change the coarse frequency after I've done this, let's keep this pretty high. We still get this fundamental down here. That's the note that I'm playing, but all of our other harmonics are moving up. And as you can hear, it gets you this kind of like grindy, scratchy kind of sound. It's very like metallic feel to it, which by itself is kind of annoying, but we're going to filter that out. But we'll come back to that in a minute. We can also try and do the same thing on oscillator C. So if we're starting like this with a volume of negative 14 here, and of course frequency of 1, and we take this guy and turn it up. Again, you can see we get more different harmonics happening here. Now, I'm going to take this one and turn this one up. And again, these are really kind of grimy, I don't know if grimy is the word, very kind of metallic kind of sounds. So if you're into that really kind of like harsh style of dubstep, this is a fantastic, really easy way to get that, because you can control and get exactly the right amount of that you want. That kind of like ringy metallic sound. Super easy way to do that. So then what we're going to do, now that we have this is obviously like way too much, is we are going to filter it out. So we're going to turn the filter on and turn this up. Actually, before we even do that, yeah, let's play around with this first. Before we get into filter, instead of letting this sustain and be really metallic and scratchy, we can go to the volume envelope specifically of this oscillator, and we can take our sustain and turn it down. So that metallic part doesn't sustain in there. Which we can do some cool stuff with it. We want to go for the kind of plucky thing. Like that. Can be kind of nice. Now that we've done that, and we're going to keep doing this a lot for all of our different oscillators, we're going to play with our volume envelopes to make things kind of behave differently depending on how we want them to sound. But we're going to take this and we're going to filter it out, because we do not want all of those like really high frequency, all that high frequency stuff is kind of harsh to listen to all the time. So we're going to take the filter frequency, we're going to turn this down. We can hear that gets rid of all of it except for this lower end part that I have. And why is there a little bit of motion there? Is that normal? Cool. So we're going to take this filter and then we're going to turn the envelope up. And this is where we're going to get the plucky part of our sound. Like that. So this gives us just that little bit of plucked sound, but also keeping it really bassy. And we can control how far we want that envelope to move up by controlling the frequency right here and then turning this down. So how much of those kind of mid-high frequencies do you want in there can be controlled with both the filter here, controlling the envelope if you want it to be a little longer. Or really quick and plucky, we can control all that right here. And then we can also control the amount of coarse frequency. To figure out where we want that kind of like higher pitched part of our bass line to live. Another fun thing we can do here is instead of just using one of these, we can use two of them with different coarse frequencies. So we could try this one out somewhere around here. Something like that could work. Just between controlling these four knobs, once we have these settings kind of where we want them to be, there's a lot of things you can do here. There's a lot of different kinds of sound design you can do. There's a lot of different places you can take it. There's infinite combinations, infinite different kinds of sounds you can make just between those four knobs. And as of right now, I am only using sine waves. It's just sine wave here, sine wave here, sine wave here. If we wanted to, we could try using like a different waveform. Let's try like a triangle. Or we could try like a square. And let's make this one also a little pluckier. Double over. Yeah, so there's no right or wrong answer here. Try out different waveforms, try different volumes, try different coarse frequencies. We can get oscillator C involved. And a lot of times there'll be these sweet spots where you kind of like, you tweak all these knobs and you find like just the right spot. And all of a sudden it sounds just the way you want it to. So tweaking the volumes, tweaking the coarse frequency, tweaking the, it's called oscillator shape, playing with your filter settings. The filter's too high, it doesn't really work, so we're gonna keep this pretty low. So there's lots of options there. It's really up to you to kind of like figure out where you like it. I'm gonna keep them all sine waves from right now. I think it's probably the easiest way to make it work. Otherwise, sometimes it can get a little bit unruly depending on how you have your settings set up. Maybe not that high on the filter. I don't mind that. That could work. We need a little bit more envelope opening up. Yeah, that could be kind of roughly what I'm looking for. Gets me like close enough. Too low. Yeah, I could get behind that. That could be something we could work with. And let's go ahead and add a little bit of extra distortion here with some of the different analog modeling types. Let's try the MS-21. This should help beef it up a little bit. Let's give it a little bit more resonance. So one thing you probably should watch out for is you'll notice that if the volume on oscillator B is very low, we get a lot of this really low harmonic here. But as I start to turn this up, it starts to kind of like spread out our harmonics more evenly, so we lose a lot of the bass sound with it. Like up here, we're getting more of this than we are of this. And because we're doing bass sound design here, we want to make sure that we still get plenty of that low end in there. That's too much of that. That's closest to what I think I want to go for so far. I do just want to try real quick, just if we make this one a square. Gives that extra little bite to it. I wonder if there's a way I can get rid of that if we just turn the envelope down here a little bit. Actually, kind of works too. I'm going to be screwing around with this for a little while longer, and then we'll actually start using it. But I feel like we're getting pretty close to what I want to go for here. Yeah, that could work. Yeah, I'm okay with that. Keep in mind that if you are just joining us and you have a question you would like to ask related to music production with Ableton Live, you are more than welcome to toss it into the chat, regardless of whether it's relevant to what I'm doing right now or not. What's up, Chuck? How are you doing today? Welcome. As of right now, I'm just doing a little bit of like plucky, bassy sound design, just trying to figure out where I want to put all of my operator levels in operator, and really kind of dive into using the coarse frequency to make the sound the way I want it to actually sound. That's feeling pretty good. I kind of like that. Don't mind that either. I want to add a little bit more of that like weird high frequency stuff though. Oh, there we go. I think it's about as good as it's going to get for right now. Yeah, I can get behind that. All right, so there's is bass sound number one that's going to be using operator to get that nice kind of pluckiness into it. And I still might tweak it some more. This is the kind of sound that you can just spend forever tweaking and just continually playing with those controls and never quite gets it exactly the way you want it to. What's up? You run marathons. How are you doing today? And I do not run marathons. All right, so we can keep this the way it is for right now and probably come back to it. But I want to try doing kind of the same thing, but not quite exactly the same thing, using Wavetable. So Wavetable is my other kind of go-to synthesizer for anything bass related. Did I just delete it? Let's go back and not delete what I just did. Let's put that on the other track here. So we can accomplish kind of the same thing. We're not going to have quite as many controls for customizing the harmonics as we did with Operator, but we do have a lot of other really cool options inside of Wavetable that we don't get in Operator. Awesome. Well, welcome to the live stream. If you have any questions, feel free to toss those in the chat. Right now, I'm just kind of rambling about plucky bass sound design, but I'm open to talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. But glad you could make it to a stream finally. All right, so same basic concept here. We're going to get into the wavetable in a little bit, but we want to set up first our volume envelope and then our filter envelope to that way we can get the right kind of plucked sound. So right now, I just have a big bass sound, but if I go to my volume envelope, take the sustain, turn it all the way down, it sounds a little bit more plucky. Something like that's probably going to be totally fine. Just by adjusting the decay, we can kind of control how plucky we want that to be. The other thing we want to do is go to envelope 2 and do the exact same thing. Take the sustain, turn it all the way down, and we want to apply envelope 2 to the filter frequency. So we're going to go to our matrix, find our filter frequency. If you don't see it, just click on it and it'll show up right here. And we're going to take envelope 2 and we're going to apply it there. And as of right now, doesn't do anything. So we need to first take the frequency, turn it all the way down. And that's how we're going to start moving our filter up and down. We're going to give it a tiny bit of resonance. And use this to control the amount. So it's going to be how far it moves up. So if you want it to be, again, this more kind of like muted, subdued kind of sound, keep that pretty low. But if you want a bit more frequencies in there, you can open up all the way down or all the way down. I'm going to put this on monophonic. That way, if I accidentally play two notes at the same time, it's not a big deal. And then from here, we're just going to kind of start tweaking our settings to start to figure out how we can make this have a lot of interesting, like, sonic character to it. Because right now it sounds good, but it's a little generic. We can also play around with the timing here. To figure out exactly how long we want it to take to decay down. All right, so Chuck is asking, what's the best latency-free way to bounce audio or MIDI track with lots of plugins, especially in session view? Can I real-time record to another audio track with lots of CPU and plugins on the original track? Yes, you absolutely can. There's a bunch of different ways to do that, depending on what it is you're looking to do and what your workflow is and what you're trying to set up as. If you have a really CPU heavy track and you just want to convert it to audio, so that way it doesn't take as much CPU, your best option by far is going to be freezing and then maybe flattening. So if you don't know how that works, basically, if I have a track here, and here's going to be my beautiful MIDI clip, and say this had 1 million plugins on it, 1 million effects on it, and I want to convert to audio, just right-click on the track and hit freeze track. This will re-record every single clip on that track, both session view and arrangement view, to an audio clip, like that. That'll give you a frozen track, which is something halfway in between an audio track and MIDI track. It looks like MIDI, but I can't edit it, I can't do anything to it, I can't change it. And when I hit play, it will be referencing that audio file that's now on my hard drive. So if you purely just want to save yourself CPU, just freeze, and then if I play, it's not taking up any CPU because it's just playing audio. And then same thing is true with all the plugins and effects. You can't do anything, you can't mess around with them. That way, if you change your mind, and this should be pretty latency free, you don't need to worry about latency when you do this. If you change your mind, you can right-click again and you can hit unfreeze. You can go back in, you can add in a few more notes or change things or tweak your settings or whatever, and then you can freeze it again. Then, if you're like, I fully want this as audio, I just want to bounce it just so I can have it as audio, you could right-click again and hit flatten, and then boom, it converts that entire track fully to an audio track, and it will get rid of all the plugins and all the effects that are on it and leave you with just the audio version. Like that. So that would be, in my opinion, if you're just purely looking to save yourself CPU and you don't want to have to like resample a bunch of stuff or bounce things out, freezing and flattening is going to be the best option for you. However, if you are in a different situation than that, I'm going to just Command Z to undo that. The one thing you need to watch out for is once you flatten a track, the only way to get your MIDI and all your other stuff back is to Command Z to undo it. So generally, I like to save a new version before I flatten, and that way I can always go back and get MIDI if I need it. The other way to do it is what you're talking about, real-time recording to another track. And there's a couple ways to do that. One way to do that would be just to open up your inputs and outputs here. And this is a MIDI track. This is an audio track. If I want to send my audio from this track to this track, here where it says audio from, I can just grab audio from any track in my session. So I'm going to grab from wavetable. I'm going to record enable it over here. And I hit this button here. And I just resampled from one track to another. So this is a couple more, it's like a slightly longer process. However, it's will accomplish what you're asking, basically, real-time recording from one track to another. The other way we could do this, because there's a million ways to do everything inside of Live, is instead of grabbing audio from that specific track, you can hit this resampling option right here. If you hit the resampling option, it will take anything and everything that gets sent through your master. So this is really good if you have a couple, like you have 2 or 3 tracks and you want to kind of condense them all into one audio file. You hit resampling, you hit record here. It's grabbing what would be from every track, but in this case, it's just this one right now. So yeah, so those are all ways that you can kind of resample or just kind of convert things, freeze things, turn them into audio. And that way you can then either delete your track that has all the plugins that's messing with your CPU, or like I said, freezing it will basically allow you to go back if you ever need to. And those are all fairly low latency. You shouldn't really need to worry about latency with those a lot. A lot of the time you need to worry about latency more coming into your computer, not as much so latency from one track to another. It does exist, but it's usually not as big of an issue. So yeah, so you can it should not introduce latency to resample. Maybe if your computer was like really struggling, it might. However, if you freeze or flatten, as far as I know, there should be no latency. Like, this, I don't have much going on here, but when I freeze this and then flatten it, like if we're looking at the time in here, it's like it's pretty spot on. There might be a hair of latency involved, but try it out for yourself and see if you notice it causing a lot of latency when you do that. But it shouldn't be too much of an issue. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any other further questions about that, because that can be a pain in the ass to deal with once you have like a bunch of stuff going on and then trying to get rid of all the latency and things that are happening. All right. So you run marathons asking, what's a good method for loading multiple samples on a single cell in a drum rack when triggering them, depending on what note velocity? I.e. soft hi-hat or hi-hat velocity. Yeah, there are a bunch of ways to do that. I will show you real quick. That's a fantastic question. So off of the top of my head, the best way to do that would be if you are starting with an empty drum rack. And say we have a couple of hi-hats. Say we have this one. And this one. So first off, the easiest way to layer multiple drum samples on the same pad in a drum rack is just to hold the command key, or I think it's control on PC. I always forget. The key command on PC is almost the same, but it's a little different. But on a Mac, hold down command, click and drag. It puts them both inside a drum rack like that. So now we can play both of them at the same time. There's one of them. there's the other. So if you want to velocity map them so that different velocities trigger different ones, because this is inside a drum rack, or an instrument rack inside a drum rack, we are going to have options for mapping them by key or mapping them by velocity. So for example, if I do something like this, actually let's go that direction. Anytime I hit a lower velocity, it's going to play that hi-hat sample. And when I had a higher velocity, be that sample. So that would be probably the easiest way to do it. It's essentially one instrument rack on a pad in a drum rack, load up whatever samples you want. You could have 3 or 4 drum samples all in there and have different velocities for each one, and just kind of divide up the ranges here. You could also overlap them. So there are certain ranges where it would play both of them if you wanted to. Or you could do something I like to do quite a bit is in a situation like this, is overlap them a lot. And then there's this lighter colored line up top here. This is basically a crossfade. So if I do something like this and something like this, now they're kind of crossfading into each other. So if I play a really low velocity, we're mostly getting that one. Oops. But that way it kind of fades them from one to another. And that's a really cool way to do it as well. So you get like all this in-between zone. Sometimes you want it to be one or the other, in which case I would do something more like this. Or sometimes you want them to crossfade. If you had a bunch of them, see if I can find a couple more. These are loops. I don't want loops. Just give me some one shots. Let's put that one in there. All right, I'm just going to search for HH. That usually gets me more one shots. All right, just give me normal samples. All right. So another thing we can do here is if you had, say, like 5 or 6 samples and you wanted them to all divide evenly, if you hold down Shift and then right click and you hit distribute ranges equally, it now just divides up the velocity ranges automatically. So you get a bunch of them there and automatically have them be divided up. Yeah, Mike called it exactly. So you could just right click and split them up evenly. Sometimes you don't want them to be evenly. Sometimes you do want them to be overlapped or whatever. In which case you can kind of customize it however you see fit. The other way to do this is, if you didn't want to use the drum rack, is instead of using a drum rack, we could use a sampler. So normally when you load up a sample inside of a drum rack in Live, it puts it in Simpler. However, you could also use Sampler. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to take this, I'm going to right click on it and hit Convert Simpler to Sampler. I now have Sampler, which means I can have this zone area up here. And then in my zone area, let's take this guy. I'll just go back in here, pick a different one. And take a sample, toss it in here. And then they all exist in the zone area, and then it's the exact same thing, except for it's happening up here. Have your velocity area, distribute your ranges equally, and then boom, it'll work the exact same way. So I personally like the instrument rack method better. You could also do it entirely inside a sampler. Sure, Mike, this is a great question. So a lot of people don't realize that this is a feature, but you can have sends and returns inside of your drum rack that are separate from your regular sends and returns. But they're it's kind of weird to figure out how to get them to make them work. So basically, in order to access your inputs and outputs, or your sends and returns in your drum rack, you have to first hit this button right here. This shows and hides your chain area, which is useful. But also, when you hit this button, it also gives you options for inputs and outputs, sends, and returns. However, there's a very specific order of operations here you need to follow in order to make this work. First thing you need to do after you hit this button is you need to hit the return button, which opens up this little audio effect area down here. Once you've done that, grab an effect like a reverb. And let's grab, do they have any drum ones in here? Whatever, use this one. And you're going to drag an effect and toss it in here. This now gives you your little A return track, or return. Only after you've added an effect to the return area over here does this S button actually do anything. So now you've done that, you hit the send button, it gives you a send right here. So now you turn this up. Now I have a built-in send. And I think you can have up to 6 of them per drum rack if you ever wanted to go that far with it. So this is really handy if you have like a very specific reverb you want to have on just your snare and you don't want to have to do a bunch of other crazy routing. You could have a built-in send and return for just your snare inside of your drum rack. But that's the process. You gotta first hit this button, then hit the returns, then add the effect, then hit the send button. Once you hit the send button, it adds the send knob over here, and then you can control the amount going to the send. Other than that, they work very, very similar to how the regular sends and returns work. One thing that I would like to point out, though, and this is the reason that I don't really end up using sends and returns inside of my drum rack, is if I were to, for example, have some more samples in here. So say I have a kick in here, and I've got a snare in here. If I were want to what's it called? Extract chains. So here's my beautiful drum pattern. If I wanted to extract chains, I could go in here and say I want to extract that hi-hat. I extract chains. The sends don't go with it, which is to me a little obnoxious. So if I was using a little internal return track here with a send, and then I extracted it onto its own track, on the new track, there is the send track. The effect on that does not go with it, which is unfortunate. Otherwise, I think I'd use this feature a lot more because I almost always write my drums in a drum rack altogether, and then I almost always extract them out later on so I can mix them and things like that. Yeah, I think, Mike, it all comes down to workflow. I think if you get in the flow and you build a bunch of drum racks with a bunch of really cool sends and returns, and just that's what works for you, then 100% go for it. But for me, I've just gotten in the habit of starting everything drum rack, extracting things, and then once I've extracted them, then I'll just use my regular return tracks for my all my send effects and things like that. All my return tracks. Yeah, like I agree. This is probably one of the most hidden features in live. I'm trying to think if it's the most hidden feature in live. That sounds like a good clickbait title. The most hidden feature in live. You'll never guess what it is. I need to start doing more clickbait titles for my videos. Sweet, but yeah, those are all really great questions. Anybody else out there got any questions that they want to ask? So You Run Marathons is asking, while we're on drum rack, what's the best method for stemming out individual tracks if I use a lot insert effects along the channel strip? So I would probably use the method that I just did, the extract chains method. So there's a bunch of weird things about extracting chains that you need to be aware of in order to get the most out of it. So, for example, if we were to have an effect here and an effect here, all right, so this is our drum rack. We got some Midi in here. We got a kick, a snare, and a hi-hat. The hi-hat is a sampler. Oh, that's where I wanted to put the effect. With the, let's put some redux on it. That. So when I go in and I hit extract chains, there's two ways to do it. One is just find the chain area, right-click, hit extract chains here. Or the other one is hit this little triangle guy and hit extract chains here. Either one of those will work. So when I hit extract chains, these are the things that go with it. Actually, everything goes with it except for two or three things. So when I hit extract chains here, it creates an entirely new drum rack that includes this device, whatever effects are on that chain. So this effect did go with it, as well as any relevant MIDI information, as well as all the automation. The things that don't go with it are, number one, any effects that are outside of the rack. So back in our drum rack, this overdrive did not go with it. The other thing we already talked about that doesn't go with it is the sends and returns. They stay there for some reason. That really bothers me, but whatever. The other thing that does not go with it is the channel volume. So if this drum rack was at like -10 decibels, when I extract it, it goes back to 0. So to deal with that, the effects that are outside of the drum rack, so say I had this effect here, I just copy and paste them over after I've extracted it. Basically the same thing. It's slightly more CPU, but it's not a huge deal. If I am really worried about CPU, is I will just put both of these in a, let's go ahead and put these guys next to each other. I'll put both of them in a group, and then I'll take whatever effects were on the entire drum rack and just put it on the group. That's another option there. Then we don't need to put that there. And then the last thing is I'll just take the new channel volume and have it match the channel volume over here. So yeah, so everything else that I'm aware of when you extract goes with it, except for effects that are outside the drum rack, your internal sends and returns, and the channel volume. Those are the three things. I think any of these controls here, so it's seeming like panning and stuff like that, but mostly the volume is what you're concerned about. Yeah, so the if you were worried about the sends and returns, you could just copy them, copy it here, and then paste it in there, and then just turn it back up. That would be the workaround. My workaround is to not use the internal sends and returns, but now that this is on its own track, I now use my sends and returns here. And that's kind of where I start doing that. User 87, we'll get back to you about latency in just a moment. I did not miss what you said, but I just wanted to finish talking about this topic before we move on to more latency stuff. Yeah, so if you're, just going to Mike's question, so if you were adjusting like the volume here and panning here, I believe that does go with it. We hit extract. Yeah, on the new track, the individual volume here and the panning here go with it. Basically, anything inside the drum rack goes with it, except for the sends and returns. Anything outside the drum rack does not go with it. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense. And then, like I said, once I do that, I'll put all of them in a group. This is my drummer group, and then I can start processing this in whatever way that I was processing my entire drum rack before. Yeah, I believe I made a video specifically about this early on in the channel. So if you want to see me kind of go over it again, it should be up there somewhere. But this is how I write all my drums. Everything starts in one place. I extract them to their individual tracks. I rename them. And then I put them all in a drum group, and then I process my drum group however I need to, or however I want to. All right. So user 87 is asking, what does latency reduction affect? Some external MIDI devices work better with it off. So I'm assuming you're talking about the reduced latency when monitoring. Is that the latency option you're talking about? This is going to basically, when you have audio coming in, it's going to try to reduce the latency on that, essentially, which is going to be like slow down your computer a little bit, but it's going to get you more accurate recording, essentially. So I imagine if you're doing a bunch of MIDI stuff with a bunch of external devices, you probably don't need that. MIDI latency and audio latency are two different beasts, and generally you need to be more concerned about audio latency. MIDI latency is generally like a hardware issue. I guess sometimes it can be a software issue, but that's going to be like MIDI routing from one place to another if you have like a really complicated MIDI setup. Generally, MIDI latency is not going to be as much of a big deal. Are you talking about the delay compensation here? Yeah, I'll have to look into it and double check and get back to you to see if delay compensation would affect MIDI. Off the top of my head, I don't. Yeah, I'm not gonna be able to tell you without looking it up whether delay compensation. I believe both of these settings primarily affect how your computer receives an audio signal and not a MIDI signal. But I could be wrong about that. I don't want to give you the wrong information though. And then Mike was asking, completely separate question. If you export audio, how does Ableton figure out the length to be rendered audio? It seems arbitrary. This is a great question. Because this freaks people out quite a bit. So when you, user, I'm gonna get back to you about this. I'm gonna figure this out because that's one of those weird questions where I'm like, I don't think that affects the delay compensation. I don't think will affect your MIDI, but I want to read the manual again to double check to make sure I'm not telling you something wrong. All right, so say I've got a song, and here's my song, and I want to export this song. If I hit export, let's say MIDI clip. There we go. Right now, it's going to pick a render start and a render length. This is based off of the amount of time you have selected in the arrangement view. So it's starting at bar 14, going for 25 bars, because that's what I have selected right here. If I were to select from here to here and go to export, it's starting at bar 8, going for 3 bars. So generally what I do in order to make sure that my render is correct is on any one track, it doesn't matter which one, I will highlight the length that I want to render. And that way, when I go to export, it'll be starting at bar 1 for 40 bars. So that's basically how it decides the length. It's not random. It's actually based off of what you have clicked on. And so a lot of times, if you're not paying attention, if you have like a little clip selected and you go to export, you're like, why is this starting at bar 20 for 6 bars? It's because the last thing you clicked on it, that's the length that you had selected. So I've just got to have it select wherever you want to export and then hit the export button. Yeah, like, so if you don't have anything selected, it might be based off of whatever clips are in there. Sometimes it is a little chaotic. Like if I have nothing selected right now and I go in here, it's selecting based off of the length of these clips. But if I did something like this, oops, it's going bar 5 for 45 bars. So yeah, it's just doing the length of whatever clips are there. I can tell you how many times I've been ready to bounce out a track and then bounce it. It's like a 6-bar loop of my song. And I'm like, that's not at all what I meant to do. So now I just always just select the area first and then hit export. Sweet. Anybody else have any questions, things that they want to talk about? I appreciate you guys all showing up and hanging out with me today. Makes the stream a lot more interesting when you guys are bringing lots of interesting questions. I'm going to leave that drum rack there. Sweet. Well, if nobody else, yeah, latency to me is the kind of thing that I need to see in person. Like I need to be able to looking at the gear and looking at the setup to really kind of analyze what's going on with it, because there's so many different things that can cause it in somebody's signal flow and so many different ways to deal with it that it really kind of depends on what the setup is like. But G-Long, I appreciate you helping out. That's super nice of you. Sweet. Well, if nobody has any pressing questions, or whether you're typing them out, I'm going to. Oh, Mike, I have so many ideas for generative music. This has very much been something that the last, especially year and a half, 2 years, I've been getting way more into. I have a bunch of videos on the channel about both generative sound design as well as a bunch of different tools for doing generative things. I think number one, to me, a lot of generative is about setting up kind of chains of things that sound good. So for example, this is going to be my generic example for generative stuff that I think works really well, is using something like, we'll do some generative percussion stuff. So I'm going to go to my sample library And I'm going to find a bunch of one-shots. I take these guys, toss them in here. And we'll grab a couple more. All right, there's 10 one-shots. All right, just make sure everything is still working here. Tips, all right. So yeah, I'll talk about this in a minute. Brian had a quick question though. Is I have a very dense MIDI clip that overloads the synth in sending, causing CPU overload. Can we thin out MIDI notes before they get to the synth? Yeah, there's a couple different ways you could probably do this, depending on how you want to thin them. The easy way off the top of my head, if you only wanted like a certain range of those notes to be sent through, is if you were to grab the pitch MIDI effect. This has a range of lowest and highest. And if you play a MIDI note above or below that, it does not let it through. So that would be one way. If you had just like MIDI notes all over the place and you want like, okay, I want just 2 octaves, you could set the lowest note and then the range here. Yeah, Mike, we'll be able to get to it. It is going to take a minute. So that would be one way to thin out MIDI notes. Yeah, I guess it depends a little bit more specifically if you had like other ways where you wanted to thin them out, where you wanted like every third note to be sent through or something like that. You could probably think of like other creative ways to do that. But let me know if you have something more specific you want to thin them out by. Yeah, like do you want them to thin like so that like yeah, how do you want them to be thinned? Yeah, you could thin them out by velocity potentially. I mean, you could use an instrument rack. Actually, you could just use the MIDI rack. Let's do it this way. MIDI effect rack. Create a bunch of empty chains. Oops. We're going to duplicate these chains. And we could have certain velocities be sent through. And some of these chains are just like empty. Or some of these chains could be going into a pitch device that excludes basically everything. And so like this one doesn't be, this specific velocity range doesn't get let through, but everything else is let through. That could be one way to do it. You could also do the same thing for pitch. So if you only wanted certain pitches to be let through or certain ranges of pitches to be let through, you could go to the key area over here and be like, okay, this octave's gonna be let through. This octave's not, or whatever. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you could kind of play around with just dividing things up that way and make it certain velocities and notes just don't be let through and just toss it on there. And have anything you don't want to be let through go through a pitch device that's excluding everything, and anything that you do want to be let through just have on a empty chain. Oops, it's supposed to be in here. If that makes sense. Yeah, I'm sure there are also Max for Live devices that'll do stuff like that. Also, all right, off the top of my head, there's another one that could work. Same kind of idea, where you take the expression control and you use the incremental setting right here. And I just made a video about this. And then map this to some kind of gate that opens and closes the MIDI note. So like every third note gets let through or something like that. What would be the best way to do that? You could also use the scale device. This would also allow you to exclude notes. Like, okay, so in this case, F sharp and G sharp and A would not be let through. So yeah, the answer to your question, Brian, is always going to be getting really creative with your MIDI effects. That would also work. Oh man, we got so many questions coming in, and I do want to make sure I get to Mike's question about generative stuff. So I'm sorry if I'm going to be jumping around a little bit, but this is just what happens when a bunch of people ask questions all at the same time. But I appreciate the questions. Cool. Yeah, Brian, no worries. There's a number of different ways to do it, but I'll think about it more and let you know if I think of anything more specific than those. But instrument effects with lots of exclusions. Scale device works great for excluding notes. Expression control for modulating what gets through and what doesn't get through. User 87, we'll get to your questions in just a minute as well. All right, so I got some metallic sounds here. And we want to do some generative stuff here, right? The key here, in my opinion, is we want to, number one, pick things that sound good and sound decent together. And in this example, we're using a bunch of metallic hits, but these could be chords. These could be like one-shot chords that are all in the same key, or they could be individual notes if you wanted to create generative melodies, whatever you want. But picking good source material, I think, is part of the key, not source material, but picking good material to work with is part of what makes generative work. Sweet. So what I'm going to do is use the random effect here, toss it in there. So that way, each time I play a note, it adds a new random thing. What's up, Marathon? So I took the summer off from doing classes, so I will probably have some fall classes coming in pretty soon in the next couple of weeks, once I figure out a bit more about my schedule. Yeah, I definitely am. All right, so if I play one note, which is going to be the C1 note, right now it does nothing. If I turn my chance up to 60%, it's going to randomly pick a different note, right? The choices is how far it will go. So if you want it to occasionally pick empty notes, which I do, make sure your choices is larger than the number of sounds you have in here. So I have 10 samples with choices of 12, which means occasionally it'll pick an empty spot. Set our choices to be 14. So now that I've done that, I'm going to, instead of having to like hit this all the time, just toss an arpeggiator on here. And let's take the chance to make this a little higher. And let's turn the rate up a little bit. So 12 notes. So I'm just holding on one note and it's just generating a bunch of stuff. I also made a video on specifically this kind of setup a while back on the channel. So yeah, I can just hold this down, which like by itself is like not that cool. But if we were to layer that with like an actual drum beat, so I'll take this guy. And that guy. A little drum beat, change the tempo a little bit. most of the time it sounds okay. Some of the times it sounds really cool, sometimes it doesn't. But that's part of just being random, right? So starting off with material that you think all will work together. In this case, I specifically was looking for sounds that were very quick and didn't have a lot of like tonal quality to them. And then you're just kind of like, you're keying up your MIDI effects to perform in a way that still sounds good, but is also not super predictable. Like you want to find that balance of some chaos, some not chaos, and that way it still sounds pretty decent. And then it works, in my opinion, especially well once you layer it up with things that are pretty predictable. Like this drum beat is like not super crazy, but layer the two of them together and you get some like pretty cool results pretty quickly. And then while you're doing that, you resample this to a new track. So we already have a resampling track over here. I'm going to hit record here. We're going to enable both of them. Record this. Recorded all of that. And so like say I like this bar right here. Loop that. Why is that sounding weird? Oh, I recorded everything. That has the drums in there too. But you get the idea. So using that, and like I said, in this situation, I'm just using these. Oh my God, I want to go crazy. All right. I'm just using these guys right here, but you could do the exact same thing, slow it way down and do it with chords. And so every quarter note, you just get a new random chord if you just put all the chords in a particular key that you liked. So stuff like that works really well. You can play with the rhythm. You can, control how random it is. That's really, I think, kind of the key to a lot of like generative kind of stuff. At least the kind of generative stuff I've been to is like you spend a lot of time setting up all your MIDI effects, all your sequences, all that kind of stuff, and then you just let it go and then kind of see what happens, which I guess is always kind of the goal of generative. But let me know if you want me to dive deeper into that, because there's a lot more examples of different kind of generative stuff you can do. If you're into that kind of stuff and you want to move beyond just kind of the basic MIDI effects, if you have not played around with the probability pack, probability pack by Sonic Faction, this is free. I just made a video about one of these MIDI effects, one of the Max 5 devices the other day. Amazing for this kind of stuff. Just once you can figure out how to get the settings the way you want, you're good to go, and you can just generate lots and lots of cool melodies and ideas, rhythms, all that kind of stuff. What's up, Emo? How you doing? Like it's been a while since I've seen you. Nice. That sounds like a dope setup. And are you sending all of that into live, and then you can edit it and mess around with it in live too? All right. Let me jump back. User 87 had a couple questions earlier. Talking about Mpe single voice gliding. All right, so first he wants to send a MIDI CC to an external instrument. You should be able to, if I'm not mistaken. I believe I've done this before. If you have an empty MIDI track, you send MIDI to, I'll send it to the ISU driver, but you would send it to your hardware or whatever. Load up a clip, go in here, go to MIDI control, pick whichever CC you want. So say we wanted CC22, and then just plug in your automation. And when you hit play here, this will send out CC22 to your hardware or wherever you want it to go. That's at least how I've done it in the past, and that's worked for me. Depending on the kind of gear you're using, it might be slightly different than that, but that was all I really need to do. Just go to make sure there's no effects or instruments on that track. And number 2, in your MIDI 2, send it out wherever you want to send it, and then you just plug in your automation for your MIDI CC. That should work. Yeah, Emo, if you're having issues not having black hole on Windows, you could try, there's 2 programs out there. One of them is the one I'm using, Audio Hijack. Actually, I use that with black hole. You're probably going to try Loopback, which is really cool but expensive. And I believe that works for PC as well as for Mac. And then user 87 was also asking how to use Mpe single voice gliding. I'm assuming you're just talking about the gliding pitch bends in here. If you're doing this kind of thing. Is that the pitch bend you're talking about? The single note pitch bends? If so, okay, this part's so annoying. If so, the way you do something like this for the Mpe pitch bends is, number 1, add your MIDI note. Number 2, go to your Mpe tab over here where you have your slide and your pressure. And then right here on the actual note itself, you get a little pitch bend. So you can make a pitch bend like this. However, it does not work right off the bat if you were to add this to a wavetable. No pitch bend there. In order to make the Mpe pitch bend work, you need to apply it. And the way you do that is, at least in wavetable, is go to Mpe, go to the note pitch bend, apply it to pitch, turn it up all the way or all the way down to make it a 1-to-1 ratio. And now if you play it, there's your per note pitch bend. Let's see this one. There you go. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. That's way down there. But yeah, the weird thing is you need to still apply it over here in order to make the pitch bend work. I have not tried. Wait, which Mpe control base are you talking about? This one. I have played around with this one a little bit. I haven't really found a lot of reasons to use it. This looks cool. And you have individual controls for each one, yeah. I should play with this more. It looks really cool. I just never really... I got my Mpe controller, I got my Rolly Block, expecting to use it a bunch now that I have, Live has Mpe capabilities, and I have not ended up using it as much as I thought it was going to be. Yeah, I've played around with it a bit, played around with recording Mpe from my controller. I always feel like it sounds cool, but it's kind of a pain in the ass to deal with sometimes. It can be kind of a pain to kind of record the Mpe in a way that makes a lot of sense. Maybe I should just get a C-board instead of the block. The block it's a little small to do anything kind of performative with. So we'll see. Maybe I'll get a C-board someday. Sweet. So I believe I've caught up to all the questions. If anybody has questions, now is the time to toss them in the chat. They can be either about the things we have been talking about, or they can be about something totally different. And I appreciate all you guys for showing up and hanging out today. Makes the stream a lot more fun when you guys are here to ask me questions. Yeah, every time I try to use the block, it, like I said, it sounds cool, but it doesn't, like I really have to work to make it sound the way I want. It's like it sounds cool and unpredictable, and sometimes that works really well, and sometimes that's what I want. But sometimes I just want things to sound consistent and me understand exactly why it sounds the way it does. Emo, check out Loopback. It's made by a company called Rogue Amiga, Amoeba, and it can do almost anything you want it to. It's like a one-stop shop for all kinds of weird audio routing stuff. And like I said, it's a little pricey, but everybody I know who uses it loves it. Henri, that is a fantastic question. Yeah, no worries. So there are a lot of different ways to approach that. I think it depends a little bit on what style of music you're making. Usually the way that I will do it, Audio Hijack is the one I'm using, Emo, with Black Hole. Usually what I'm thinking about when I'm getting to the stage where I want to start making that kind of ear candy stuff is recycling material. So I'll take material that's already there, so, something I've already written for my song, and I'll turn that into something new. So that way it's still kind of relevant to what was in the song, but also can be kind of different. So for example, this was a thing that I made an example earlier today. So say this is part of my song, and I want to use this, and I want to like turn this into ear candy or something like that. What I'm going to do is, first thing, I'm going to duplicate the track. So that way I still have the original version. And on the new version, I'm going to freeze it and flatten it, which is something I also talked about earlier on the stream. So now I have an audio version. Now that I have an audio version of this, I'm going to put this in the arrangement view just so I can see it a little easier. I'm going to start taking this and getting really creative with how it is being used in a lot of different ways. So for example, I might do some really weird warping with it. Warping is a fantastic way just to get more out of my material. I also might try reversing it. So maybe take something like this, reverse it, maybe change the timing on it, make it slower. You play with the warp modes here. Maybe I'll put this in beats mode and chop it. So something like that, just by like playing with the warping, I get something a little different. Maybe pitch this up like 2 octaves. Little things like that, and then maybe I'll start playing some effects on it. So maybe I'll put like a filter delay and like a redux on it. So this is how I'll do a lot of my kind of like ear candy sound design. I'll just take something that's already there, turn it into audio, really mess around with it, play with a lot of the settings, kind of see what I can come up with. Even playing with like pitch envelopes can be really fun. Like going into your envelopes, if we were working with the audio, go to clip, go to transposition, a little too crazy. I don't know, something like that. Just to kind of like see what happens with it. And I don't really have like a like specific thing I'm going for in a lot of cases. So something like that's kind of cool. And then maybe I'll just like take that and that'll be the loop. Yeah, so it's this very kind of like thought-free kind of sound design where you can get really experimental with it and just kind of see what happens. And then once you find that thing, you're like, oh, this is kind of cool. It works with my track. Then that's the thing. So that's one way to do some kind of like intro ear candy kind of stuff. It works really well for vocals and things like that because you can just demolish vocals and turn them into something entirely different, and then just slap a bunch of reverb and delay on them, and then they just kind of sit in the background and they sound really cool. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, recycling content is a great tool because that way it still feels relevant to the song. It still like sonically fits in. And that way you don't need to invent entirely new stuff from scratch. You can just take what you have and just have fun with it, tear it apart, and then like, cool, now that I have that, sometimes I'll even just freeze that and flatten it again. So now I have this thing, and then maybe I'll take this. Oops, I just want to loop like this little bit of it. And I'll take that, and then we'll like tweak it some more and just kind of see what happens. Maybe I will. A little too crazy. Too much. Have fun with it, I think is the big thing there. And sometimes it works, and then sometimes you do what I do, where you like take it too far, and then you just got to go back a few steps. Another really fun thing to do while we're kind of on the topic of ear candy is go crazy with arpeggiators. So if you just take any synth sound and if you go nuts with arpeggiators, so if we just take something like this, not terribly exciting, and take the steps, turn this up a bunch, and turn this down a bit. Just crank up the speed. Really high rate with really high steps and basically any sound. Sounds really cool. And then from there, you can just kind of like, toss some more delay on it. Delay is fantastic for this kind of thing. Works really well for that kind of ear candy background sound. And in this case, it's just arpeggiator, really fast rate, decent number of steps. Synthesizer, whatever settings you want. I tend to like it with really short sounds, but you can do it with long sounds if you want. It all sounds really cool if you give it a little bit of attack. You can do some like automation on that, and then toss a delay on it. We don't need this. Thank you. Works really well. All right. Sorry for the delay, Alex. Welcome. How can I trigger a Siren sample with my sustain pedal? Fantastic question. What is your sustain pedal plugged into? I'm assuming it's going through your keyboard MIDI controller, piano style MIDI controller, and then that's going into live. Though I'm pretty sure that's going to send a CC. Yeah, so if I'm not mistaken, Alex, if you're still there, when you send your when your foot pedal does its thing, I'm pretty sure it's sending the CC4 right here. That's kind of like the default one as defined by Ableton. Yours might be different, so you might need to double check this. So your foot controller is there. Yeah, in session view. So it should be sending CC4. So make sure that in your MIDI preferences, under the MIDI tab right here, make sure remote is turned on for your complete control. The complete stuff is a little picky about this. It may or may not work through. I'm not going to guarantee that this will work with the complete control because the native instrument stuff tends to like to play best with other native instrument stuff, but this should work. I've not tested this on a complete control. But yeah, make sure remote is turned on for the input from your complete control. And then you would just have your Siren sample loaded up in here and hit Command M and then hit your foot pedal, and that should map it, theoretically, provided the complete control is not taking over and stealing that MIDI signal for itself, which it might be. But it does, the foot pedal should send a MIDI CC, and you can map a MIDI CC to any clip in the session view. So you should be able to hit Command M, turns blue, find out wherever your sample is, hit the button on your or hit the thing on your foot pedal. It should map it like that. But like I said, the native instrument stuff can be a little picky sometimes, especially in their hardware. But let me know if that works, because I'd be curious to see if it does or does not. All right, I'll make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, Ema, we can definitely talk some more about your setup sometime. I'd be super curious to see what you got going on. It sounds like you got a lot of things happening, and those are the kind of setups that I think are really, really cool. All right, just catching up with chat here. Bear with me a second. Yeah, I agree with also what other things that Emo was saying about reverb and delay, perfect for eCandy, reverse samples, all those things, great. Playing with filters is another really fun thing. Doing some crazy filter automation on all kinds of different things can be really great. Awesome. Sweet. Anybody else got any questions? Things that they want to get into today? I appreciate all you guys for showing up and having lots of great questions. Or if anybody has already asked a question and wants to follow up on it, feel free to toss that in the chat. You guys had some really great questions today. Get rid of that. I think going back to Henri's questions about ear candy, what other things I use for ear candy besides resampling, vocal sampling, vocal chopping? Yeah, those are the main things I think I use, especially recently. Show you which part, Henri? Awesome, yeah, thank you, I appreciate it. Which one is this? Let's go back to... Yeah, so one thing, if we're talking about ear candy, another thing we can do here is think about like percussion and how you can like use percussion as ear candy as a way to like make things sound interesting. So for example, do I still have that recording? I have to resample this again. So this is, let's do this. This is some random percussion. This is some random percussion that I made for a example earlier. So we're gonna re-record that. Cool. So we're gonna just take bar 3 right here. Just loop that. So we're gonna take that, and if I want to turn this more into ear candy, chopping things up and glitching up is a great way to just make things sound cooler. Henri, I'll get to your next question in just a second. So if I have something like this, if I want to take some of these guys and glitch them up, I could take something like this, and just using cut, copy, paste, and duplicate, it's a great way just to rearrange a clip like this. So I can just select something like this, hit Command D to duplicate it, and now I have the same sound twice in a row. Or I could do something like this, where now I have... Or maybe I will take something like this sound right here and just copy and paste it over here. Or using the R key to reverse can be really helpful. Again, if we play this with drums, let's do another glitch up here. Let's do one up there. So yeah, so just cut, copy, paste, duplicate. Using the 0 key to deactivate, if you're not sure if you want to delete it, is really helpful in this situation. And that way you can come up with all kinds of cool combinations here. So yeah, so when you're dealing with percussion, especially like percussive loops, everything's already in the grid. So just chop things up, move them around. And then once you kind of come up with a combination you really like, let's do one more reverse there. You can select all of it, hit Command J, and it puts all of it into one clip for you. So that works really well. But yeah, so you had a question about, is there a way to create a song without having a messy mix at the end, drums first, bass second, etc.? So I think what you're talking about here is kind of order of operations for your sounds so that you can be efficient at writing. Is that what you're asking? That's what I'm assuming you're asking. The general rule of thumb that I've found is whenever you're writing a song, start with the sound that inspires you the most at the time. And this will be different for different people and different for different times. So if you are a vocalist and you are really passionate about vocals and lyrics, and that's the thing that gets you excited, start with the vocals. If you are a percussionist and you come from a drum background and you just think rhythmically, start with the drums. Or sometimes, you know, you sit down, or you're like on the way home from work and a melody pops in your head, start with melody. So start with the thing that's going to drive you the most first. And that'll help you get focused, get kind of like centered around the song, and figure out where you want to go with the song. There is no correct, you always have to start with this or this. If I'm not feeling particularly inspired to write a certain way, the order of operations that me personally I follow, and I don't necessarily recommend unless this makes sense to you, is I usually start with drums because I don't like the metronome. And that way I can at least kind of rhythmically kind of feel out how fast or how slow my song is. So I usually start with drums. Then I usually do bass after that, because bass is usually pretty simple and pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy. I can get that done. And then after that, I'll usually do my chord progression, because I can base my chord progression off of my bass line. So the bass and the chords can kind of fit together. And then after that, I'll do the melody, because for me, melody is usually the hardest part. I can do the first three parts. I can do drums, bass, chords very, very quickly and just crank them out. But the melody, in my opinion, is the thing that I struggle with the most, and it's the thing that will either make or break the song for me. And if I can nail the melody, then usually it's easy the rest of the song. Sometimes, because the melody is the hard thing for me to write, I like to get out of the way first. And that way, if I know I have a good melody, then everything else can fit in behind it. So it really kind of depends on who you are, what you like doing, and what you want to focus on. There's not going to be a right or wrong answer for that. However, I do think there's an overall workflow that is kind of universal that I think works pretty well. That has nothing to do with which sounds you're using, but more kind of like a more big picture idea of how to write a song. I kind of think it goes in like 5 stages. I should just make a video about this because I think it's important. Stage number 1 is pre-production. So that's your sound design, that's building your templates, that's cleaning your studio, that's all the things you need to do before you actually sit down to write a song. So pre-production, really important phase of the game. Make sure that you're downloading samples, or finding samples and crate digging, that kind of thing, all pre-production stuff. And then you have phase number 2 is content generation. So just writing lots of ideas, just throwing things against the wall, seeing what sticks. That sometimes you throw a bunch of stuff against the wall and it all sucks, in which case just start over. But just making lots of stuff, and the content generation phase of the workflow is much less about things being perfect and much more about just experimenting and seeing what happens. Once you have that, you're going to take all those ideas and you're going to start arranging them. So arranging would be phase 3. So you write a bunch of stuff, not really caring whether it's good or bad. And then once you have figured it out what you're going to do, then you're going to arrange your song. After you're done arranging, the song's basically done. Then you're going to mixing and mastering. So mixing first and then mastering. So those are kind of the stages I think of. I think of pre-production as one thing. I think of content generation as a different thing. I think of arranging as kind of refining all of that content into an actual song. Once you have an actual song, then you got to mix it, then you got to master it. So those are the kind of the 5 stages. But what you do within those stages kind of is up to you. But those are the when I stick to that method, thinking of it in those 5 phases, I write better songs faster. Usually. Not all the time. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, I agree with you, Emma. Most important tip of all is enjoy yourself, which sometimes can be hard with music. Sometimes it's stressful. That's a good question. Now, I've been wanting to do. Yeah, go for it. Ask as many questions as you want. I think we've got another 20 minutes or so left of stream. What time is it? Yeah, we have about 20 minutes left. I need to start. I'm going to do a video or maybe a video series just on workflow, because I think it's a topic that I have a lot to say about, and I think that there's a lot of confusion about what workflow is and how it works. Maybe I'll do like a workshop on workflow someday. All right, so you made some songs and you improve every time with new stuff. I would love to redo old tracks. Must I make them from scratch, or can I try to redo the old works I did on an old version? I mean, either one I think is fine. I think it's probably easier to go back to the old versions of the tracks and just update them. I think that'll make more sense, unless you really don't like the old track, unless you think the old track is really just like you can definitely do better than that. In which case, you could start over from scratch. But it's definitely going to be easier to take what you already have and then just update it. Although honestly, a lot of the time, if you go back to old tracks, things you worked on a long time ago, and you realize they weren't that good, you can just take them down, just take them off your SoundCloud or whatever, and just keep working on new stuff. Just keep moving, keep, writing new ideas. I would only go back and redo a song if you really feel like, oh, I can definitely do better than this on this track. I've thought about doing that a little bit, but a lot of times to me, it's more fun just to keep moving forward and just keep, making new things. Hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, no worries. Well, thanks for popping by today. And if you have more questions, you can keep them coming. As well, if there's anybody else out there in chat who has any questions, we've had a lot of really good questions today. You guys have been keeping me busy all stream. That really kind of flew by today. But I will probably hang out for a little bit longer, maybe do a little bit more sound design before we head out of here, unless anybody else has any other questions. Why is that not? Oh, it's in user mode. So yeah, if nobody else has any questions for right now, I'm going to go back to doing the sound design that I started at the very beginning of stream that I did not finish, but feel free to pop in and ask any other questions that you may have. All right, so we had this guy, and we were playing around with our filter envelope. And let's get out of C major. All right, that works okay. So this sounds all right, but it sounds just like a square plucked bass. So we got a couple of things we can do here to tweak on this to make it a little more interesting. One is go to our extra oscillator and pick something a little different. And let's turn off oscillator 1. So we can find something that has a little more kind of like interesting shape to it. We can also pitch it up an octave, which is something I'll often do, is make it so that one oscillator is regular octave, one is an octave higher. And let's also add a little bit of LFO to our oscillator position. Let's turn off the retrigger. So if I layer that with this, yeah, let's do a little pulse width modulation here, and let's try a few other different wavetables. Let's get a little bit more. A little bit too much, I think. Turn this down a tiny bit here, turn this down a tiny bit here. You get a little bit of unison. Let's try a few more wavetables. Like that. And a little bit more here. Cool. Yeah, so I like to leave my whatever my basic shape is kind of where it is, and then do a lot of my other modulation on the extra oscillator. But it really kind of depends what I'm into. Anything else I want to do in here? I think I want to put a little phaser on it. See what happens. And then what else we do? Maybe a little distortion. Let's try pedal first. I think pedal might be too much. Yeah, pedal's too much for this, I think. I want it to be a little cleaner than that. Awesome, Henri. Well, thanks for coming by today. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to know you're enjoying what we got going on over here. I'm here every Tuesday, pretty much. So if you have more questions, you're always welcome back whenever. But yeah, it's definitely the thing about music production is there's always more to learn. You're never done learning. You're always like, there's always new techniques or new things you can learn and figure out. So yeah, never stop trying to, trying new things, I think is kind of what I was trying to say there. I'm not sure I'm feeling the pulse width on this, to be honest. What if we do a little bit of envelope on the pulse width instead? Maybe that'll be all right. I think I can get more behind that. Yeah, I normally don't put envelope on pulse width, but that could work here. It gives it that nice little like a little bit of like nastiness to it. Oh no, now it's too much again. That's what I want. I want that little bit of griminess in there. Kind of want to put like a little bit of reverb on this, maybe. Normally I don't put reverb on this kind of thing, but I do want to see what happens if we can just get some reverb on just the highs. That's a lot, but we need a lot less than that. Let's do just the convolution, or just the algorithm. Yeah, no worries, Emma. Glad you're here. Yeah, I don't know if I'm feeling that. I think it's got to be less envelope, maybe. Let's see if that works. Hate it when Capture just randomly decides to set the start markers in weird places. It screwed up the whole thing. Just do that again. Cool. And then just do some 4 on the floor. Oops. All right, and what if I put like a little bit of delay on just the highs? I think it sounds better undotted. All right, now I just need a hi-hat and we're good to go. Oops. I'll just take this and toss it in here too. I want a real hi-hat though. I just gotta put a real heavy sidechain on this bad boy. So I decided like a couple weeks ago, I'm just gonna start making house music. I've like kind of made house music before, but never really made house music. So now is the time, I guess, starting today. All right, we're gonna take that and we're gonna put an arpeggiator on it, put a pitch device on it, pitch it up 2 octaves, and see what this does. I have no idea if this will sound good or not. Actually sounds really good. Yeah, now I just need a big pad in here. All right, I wasn't planning on doing all this right at the end of stream. I was just gonna like make that one sound and see what happened. I do want to play with the sound a little bit more. All right, real quick, we're just gonna duplicate this and we're gonna turn this into a pad sound, I guess. Actually, that sounds good. We're gonna turn the arpeggiator off. I'm gonna just set this to be 12. I'm just gonna do this live. How's my timing so off? Let's get these guys on time. All right, legato. Oops. And quantize. Yeah, but it's hard for me to follow what you're saying and produce at the same time. Yeah, definitely some shakers. Definitely going to be some. There's probably going to need to be some vocals in here. I agree. I don't have any vocals right on me right now that I think would work for this, so we'll just have to pretend. But I'm gonna get this pad sound in here, dial it in, and probably slow this down. It's a little too fast right now. This needs some like really heavy sidechain and a lot of reverb. Oops, that's the wrong track. I'm gonna switch this over to notch filter. Not feeling good about this pad. This pad needs like a whole reimagining from scratch. This is not doing it for me. Something like that, but everything else I like. Cool, not too bad for a couple minutes work. Sweet, well, at this point, I am probably going to call it for the evening, but appreciate all you guys for showing up and asking questions over the stream. It means a lot to me. And there's going to be no stream on Friday, no Friday feedback stream this week, unfortunately. I am probably in the next month or so going to be moving the Friday feedback streams to probably Wednesdays, just because Fridays are becoming more and more difficult for me to keep free for you guys. And I would like to still do streams and not have to cancel them all the time. But I will continue to work on this for my future upcoming house album that I will eventually someday write. I've been talking about it for a long time, and I think it's just time to do it. I think I'm just gonna write a house album. But yeah, thank you guys. Emo, thanks for popping by, chatting with me, supporting me as I mess around with some making some stuff. Also, I have some other ideas beyond just moving the Friday feedback stream to a different night for the future of the stream, or just the channel in general. The other thing, since I have at least two of you here, I have a question for you about the aesthetics of the YouTube page. So let me pull this up. So when you go to the videos page of Catalyze, it has the mixture of the live streams as well as the tips and tricks videos that I'm doing. They're kind of mixed together here. Do you think it would look better if it was only the tips and tricks videos and then the live streams were like separate from everything else? Because I can do that. I personally like that people can have access to the live streams because there's a lot of content there that people might be interested in. However, it might look a little better if it's just the tips and tricks videos that I've made. So if you have an opinion about it, either way, let me know, because I'm not sure if I should do that or not. I kind of like the way it is now, but I don't actually know what's better for you guys who are the viewers. Let me know. But yeah, other than that, if you enjoyed the stream at all, if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, like the stream, go to all my videos and watch all of them and hit the like button on all of them, or share some videos with your friends, or join the Discord, participate in whatever way you see fit. Cool, yeah, that's what I was thinking. That's what I'll probably end up doing, is just put them all in a playlist separate from everything else. But good to know. All right. Henri also is voting for separating them. Cool. I will separate those, and I thank you guys for your opinions. Sweet. All right. I'm gonna be calling for the evening. You guys have a good evening or afternoon or whatever it is, wherever time you are. But yeah, I'll see you guys later. Make some music. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night.